Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Giorgio Fazio, and I'm the Research Director of the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center. Okay, so as I said, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the launch of our latest report in the State of the Nations research series. For those not yet familiar with our work, we are the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center. We are funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and hosted by Newcastle University in partnership with the Royal Society of Arts in London. Our mission is to produce evidence-based recommendations that support the growth of the creative industries. In the State of the Nations research series, we regularly report on the latest data to inform the development of policies for the sector. The series covers four key themes: R&D, innovation and clusters, internationalization, arts, culture and heritage sectors, and education, skills and talent. Today's report provides important insights on international creative trade, and in particular looks at the impact of trade restrictions when it comes to UK creative services trade. Now, readers of our series will be by now familiar with the evidence of the fast growth of UK creative exports, and in particular creative services exports over the last decades. Now, the creative industry sector plan does recognize the strength of the sector when it comes to exporting and has set ambitious targets for both priority or primary and future growth export markets. However, when it comes to trade and services, the restrictions faced by exporters are substantially different in nature from those faced by those exporting goods. Unlike for goods, when the talk is usually around tariffs and red tape at the border, when it comes to services, restrictions come in many different and more subtle forms, such as, for example, limitations to the mobility of business people and transfer of business operations abroad in order to supply services, and issues like data access and data transfer, e-commerce, and recognition of qualifications. For these reasons, services are more difficult to integrate in standard trade agreements. There is clearly a shortage of evidence around the impact of service trade restrictions on services trade, and this is what this report tries to do: provides new evidence, doing a quite extensive and comprehensive analysis of the different types of restrictions faced by UK creative service exporters and how they affect creative services trade. The restrictions affect creative services trade to primary and future growth markets, using official data from the Department for Culture, Media and Sports and from the OECD. Now, as it is usual with our reports, these reports reflect the contributions and expertise of many people, including reviewers and stakeholder organizations, and it will not be possible without the robust work of our editorial board. Therefore, I would like to thank all those who contributed to the preparation of this report and everyone who has taken the time to participate in today's event. We hope the report and its findings will trigger stimulating discussion and help inform future action and decision making. We have an engaging session ahead of us, including a presentation of the key findings, followed by a discussion with a panel of esteemed experts on creative industries trade, and the Q&A session with those following us online. If you feel like, please share with us in the chat something about you, your name, your organization, and your interest in international trade by creative industries. Without any further ado, it is my pleasure to officially launch our report on trade restrictions and UK creative services and give the floor to my colleagues Jonathan and Daniel for a short presentation of the report and its key findings. So Daniel and Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Okay, so as Giorgio mentioned, this is a short presentation covering the main findings from our report covering trade restrictions and UK creative services that was conducted by myself and my colleagues here at Newcastle University. And this is actually the fifth State of the Nation report on internationalisation, which has covered a range of forms of internationalisation, covering trade, FDI, migration, and in particular, this report focusing on trade restrictions and creative services. So just spend a bit of time at the outset introducing some context and main aims of the report, which in essence is going to cover the pattern of creative services exports, the nature of these creative services trade restrictions, combining these two together to try and capture the extent to which trade restrictions are related to services exports, and then provide more of a case study approach that's looking at the nature of restrictions in the EU, which is one of the main primary markets for UK creative services. Then there's some conclusions and policy implications, which hopefully will be taken into the panel discussion. So as Giorgio mentioned, the focus on creative services is important, just in some ways due to the uniqueness of services exports, which is different to that of goods, and of course the nature of the restrictions behind these. But also in terms of the importance of services and exports of services, not only to the UK as a whole, where services account for nearly 60% of UK's total exports, but particularly so for the creative industries as well, which are net exporters of creative services and account for 13% of all UK services exports. So highlighting the important focus of creative services exports, which has been highlighted also in previous State of the Nation reports. As Giorgio also mentioned, expanding export growth has been outlined by the UK Modern Industrial Strategy, of which the Creative Industries Sector Plan is also an important aspect of that. So the main aim of this report is to analyse the nature of these trade restrictions facing UK creative services, and the breadth and depth of these restrictions as well. Okay, so we can start off first of all by just looking at some patterns of creative services exports. We've broken this down according to the primary and the future growth markets, which have been highlighted in the Creative Industries Sector Plan. So the primary markets are those that have tend to attract the highest volume of creative exports, compared to the future growth markets, which are highlighted for greater export potential in the long run. But notwithstanding this, the primary markets we can see here have a very high level of concentration in terms of where the UK's creative services exports are heading to. So the USA and the EU as a whole account for 42% each, and the primary markets are greater than 90% of all UK creative services exports. Within the EU, there is some variation within this. So we see Germany, Ireland, France, and Netherlands in particular. And outside of the EU, but within the primary markets, then we've got the next largest destination being Australia, greater than 2%. Which in fact attracts a greater percentage compared to the future growth markets as a whole, which is only approximately 2% of creative services exports this is an average over the past 5 years. So highlighting here the potential that's potentially not yet realised of these future growth markets. We can also highlight some variation in export destinations by subsector. So this is according to the main breakdown of creative subsectors as defined by DCMS. So again, we can see that as would be expected, the dominance of US and the EU countries, and this is the case in all of the subsectors, with the exception of architecture. Here we can see where the dominant export markets are China and Saudi Arabia. But the US is dominant in a number of these markets. In fact, has greater levels of exports compared to the EU as a whole in IT, publishing, and music. Although the EU is more dominant in film, advertising, design, and museums. Again, there's some variation within the EU. So Germany tends to be the largest market, but Ireland is prominent in advertising and architecture. And there's a greater variation in across the EU markets in some of these subsectors compared to the others. Outside of EU and the US, just some countries to highlight. So we can see Norway here in film, TV, Singapore in advertising, China in publishing, and as already mentioned, architecture as well. So again, potentially highlighting the main market opportunities for growth in these creative services exports that can vary at the subsector level. Now, in terms of our report, obviously the pattern of UK creative services exports is dependent upon a number of factors, one of which perhaps could be trade restrictions, which is the focus of this particular State of the Nation report. And to capture trade restrictions in services, we utilise the OECD Services Trade Restrictiveness Index, which is used to quantify these restrictions. And these capture different types of restrictions, such as restrictions on foreign entry, movement of people, barriers to competition, regulatory transparency, and other measures as well. Again, you can download the report to get a bit more information on the nature of these restrictions. But as a kind of overview here, so restrictions on foreign entry might capture the limitations on the amount of foreign equity, downloading, streaming, whether it's issues to do with movement of people, restrictions of sales of foreign compared to domestic films for barriers to competition, regulatory transparency and the complexity of procedures for registering companies, foreign versus domestic, and less favourable treatment of foreign suppliers are types of examples of these trade restrictions. And importantly, it can also be obtained for different subsectors across the services, and in the case, obviously, the creative industries were able to capture service restrictions in architecture, motion pictures, broadcasting, sound recording, and computer services. The OECD also quantified digital services trade restrictions, and they capture restrictions again on a range of other types of services restrictions that are more focused at the digital e-commerce level. So we've got electronic transactions, restrictions to do with payments, property rights, downloading, etc. So these are the type of, or the data we use to capture these trade restrictions. They're quantified to a certain extent. They're captured between values of 0 and 1. So 1 indicates higher levels of restrictions, 0 lower levels of restrictions. So go through a brief overview of some of the main patterns that we've found in the report. Again, for detail, you can find this in the actual report itself. So this is analysed at the subsector level, and again broken down according to the type of markets. So primary, future growth in particularly, and the blue line are those that are outside of those two types of markets. Main issues here, we can see that STRI is highest for the future growth, so the orange line, compared to the primary market, which is the green line. This is across the different creative subsectors. And across if we take an average across all these as a whole as well. Although we do also see some pattern of declining levels of trade restrictions in future growth markets across these subsectors, which is the opposite case for the primary markets, which although are absolute or lower in absolute terms, is some evidence of some increasing levels of these restrictions over time. And the narrowing between restrictions in some of these subsectors, for example, computer services and sound recording, of note here. So we can see potentially gradually opening of service markets for future growth markets, but potentially introducing more complex regulatory requirements in some of the primary growth, the primary markets. We can also break down according to these different types of restrictions that I highlighted earlier. So restrictions on foreign entry, barriers to competition, etc. There is variation here. So future growth markets are not necessarily the highest for all different types of restrictions. So we can see here regulatory transparency and barriers to competition is actually on average lower for these future growth markets compared to primary markets. Of note here in terms of absolute terms of the level of restrictions, but also the difference between the future growth and the primary markets. Restrictions on foreign entry tends to stand out as being a notable level of restriction for the future growth markets. Putting those together, so just moving on, we can also combine these. So combine these types of restrictions by subsector and type of restriction. Here we're looking at, in some ways, the extent to which the lines go towards a specific restriction compared to other restrictions in a given subsector. So again, aspects we can highlight here. For example, the future growth markets, again, restrictions on foreign entry stand out, particularly, for example, in the broadcasting and the architectural services submarkets relative to the primary markets. Restrictions to movement of people also stand out, and this also stands out not just in the future growth markets, but also in terms of the primary markets as well. Here we can see for the computer services. So as a whole, as a kind of combination of all of these, we can see that different sectors, different regulatory barriers across different markets. We have a level of heterogeneity and difference between these and across these, which indicates potentially policy responses that might potentially be tailored towards different types of markets, different types of subsectors, and different types of restrictions. Brief overview of the digital services trade restriction index. This is focusing on the more digital aspects of the services restrictions. Here we can see again higher for future growth compared to the primary markets. But across all markets, there has, especially prior to 2020, been an upwards drift of these digital services trade restrictions, although these have tailored off or levelled off in the past 5 years. And again, in terms of the different types of restrictions here, we can see that it tends to be focused on infrastructure and connectivity and other barriers affecting trade in these digital services, capturing, for example, limitations on downloading or use of local software. So that's an overview of the level of exports and restrictions, but we can also try and combine these together to see if there's any relationship between restrictions and trade. And for this part of the analysis, I'll pass over to Daniel.
Thank you, Jonathan. So due to the nature of their services, certain subsectors are likely to be more affected by certain types of restrictions than others. And to measure the importance of the trade restrictions, we use a gravity model, so that we can estimate the relationship between UK's exports and different types of trade restrictions. Now, we expect the relationship to be negative, meaning that on average, more restrictive market should be associated with less UK exports there, provided all things constant. Specifically, we pair trade exports of specific OECD-defined sectors with the DCMS-defined subsectors. And we account for economic size, physical distance, cultural distance, and year trends. So this is because, like gravity between two objects, trade volume tends to be larger between larger economies and tends to be smaller when their distances are further apart. So when we look at the next slide, using regression analysis, we find the expected negative relationships. So architecture exports are negatively correlated with other discriminatory measures in architecture services, as well as digital infrastructure connectivity. UK exports of film, TV, video, radio, photography, negatively related with other discriminatory measures in motion pictures, but also with regulatory transparency in both motion pictures and broadcasting, as well as electronic transactions. IT, software, and computer services exports are negatively correlated with restrictions to people movement and computer services, but also with other barriers affecting digital trade. Exports of music, performing, and visual arts are negatively related with other discriminative measures in sound recording, but also with restrictions on electronic transactions. So while showing that certain types of restrictions are more important to certain creative sectors than others, these results also kind of help narrow down areas for future efforts to promote creative trade. Now, on to the next slide. We know that the UK-EU TCA Trade Cooperation Agreement is under review this year. And we remember earlier how the EU remains a key primary market for UK's creative exports. So what do UK creative exporters face when exporting services to the EU? Well, using topic modeling on the SGR regulatory database in 2025, for EU countries, we identified some key themes. We labeled them as media use and reproduction, data protection, procurement, employment permit and visa, competition law, copyright, and IP. The last two are more distinct here than when topic modeling was done on restrictions in non-EU markets. And this suggests that stronger regulatory landscape around themes of competition and intellectual property is present in the EU. So for which subsectors? Well, the strongest theme with highest probability is in architecture services is competition. Competition law, such as restrictions around the equity thresholds, licensing, and cross-border acquisitions. For broadcasting, the strongest regulatory theme faced by exports is media use and reproduction, such as broadcasting time quotas and restrictions on advertising. For motion pictures, across all subsectors, especially for motion pictures and sound recording, the employment permit and visa is a prominent regulatory theme. So this can be annual immigration quota and number of documents required for visa. While only scratching the surface, this overview helps us to uncover some main regulatory themes that are most likely faced by specific subsectors who export into the EU. And finally, we know that the full report is available for download from our Creative Tech website. Here are some key takeaways. The majority of UK's creative exports go to the primary markets, specifically USA and the EU, with a combined 84% share. The future growth markets take only about 2%, so potential opportunities are plenty to increase our exports. At the same time, there are trade restrictions with varying importance to different creative subsectors, and reducing these is an important objective of trade policy. Now, future growth markets specifically tend to be more restricted, so entry and growth into these markets may require government support and new trade agreements. And for a primary market, such as the EU, however, themes of copyright and IP, as well as competition, are relatively stronger than in other markets. So regulatory alignment and specific provisions through agreements remain key to sustaining and growing exports. Thank you.
Now, as we've seen, the report raises important issues and opportunities that deserve further reflection and debate. To help us unpack these findings and explore their implications from different perspectives, but more generally discuss creative trade, we are fortunate to be joined by an excellent panel of experts on creative industries and their internationalization. So let me briefly introduce our esteemed panelists. Fran Hegyi is Chief Executive of the Edinburgh International Festival and co-chair of the Creative Industries Trade and Investment Board, soon to be the Creative Trade Forum. She's been awarded an OBE for her work as Executive Director of Hull 2017 UK City of Culture. She's also a member of the Creative Industries Council, UK Government Soft Power Council, Scottish Government's Event Industry Advisory Group, Scottish Connections Advisory Group, and Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce Business Leaders Group. Matt Turner is the CEO and founder of Creative Pod, an international full-service marketing website and design agency that had an incredible journey since he launched it from his bedroom in 2006. He has been awarded an MBE for services to business and charity, and he is a multi-award winning entrepreneur and philanthropist. Importantly, he is also an expert champion with the Department of Business and Trade. And Aisling Conlon is International Director of UK Advertising at the Advertising Association, where she leads the industry's international growth program and works in partnership with the Department for Business and Trade. She helps advertising and marketing services companies expand into global markets, leading trade missions, international partnerships, and business development initiatives across North America, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. So I think, this is really an amazing lineup. I'd like to thank you for being with us today. And I would like to start maybe by asking you to say something about yourself, your organization, explain how and why trade is important to you and to your organization. Maybe may I start from Fran?
Thanks, Giorgio. And morning, everybody. It's really, really good to be here. I think as Giorgio explained in my kind of intro, I do like a working group. So I think I wear a number of hats, and actually I'd expected to talk about two perhaps today, but on reading the report, actually there's another one that I think is really important. So my day job is as the chief exec of the Edinburgh International Festival. We're an international organisation, so we work across borders each and every day. It's what we do. We work with more than 40 countries every year. It's largely for us about movement of people, but some movement of goods as well, and it's also a bit of digital distribution. So I'm quite familiar with some of the friction that we experience in the sort of day-to-day doing business. One of the hats, as you said, that I wear is the co-chair of a new body called the Creative Trade Forum that is launching later in August with Michael Froelich, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of WPP. And our role really is to do three things. It's to support creative businesses in the UK to export, to attract inward investment, and to help sort through and reduce regulatory barriers. So the report has been phenomenally helpful in helping us kind of focus on what some of those might be. And then the third thing that really struck me as I was reading it, and why trade is important in this particular hat, is that I have been, I don't know if we are with all the kind of changes going on at the moment, a member of the Soft Power Council. And that is really a group of people helping to advise government on where to put their efforts in relation to diplomacy and soft power. And I think this report gives us really the evidence that we have been sort of crying out for in the Soft Power Council about where we should be directing our efforts. So, you talk about future growth markets and the potential that exists. I think perhaps what comes first in those markets is the building of relationships and getting to understand one another. And I think this is just absolute grist to the mill for the Soft Power Council. So I think just in lots of things that I do, trade is really, really important.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fran. Matt?
Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me, Giorgio. So I run Creative Pod, a full service marketing creative business. Like Giorgio said, I started 20 years ago in my bedroom and have grown it and grown it and grown it. We're about 45 people at the moment. We have clients in best part of 11 or 12 countries now. And we've also got a pool of clients that we market internationally. So it's important that we have that insight and knowledge into that international makeup so that we don't put a foot wrong for our clients as well. I've got the role with the Department of Business and Trade as one of their export champions, and I've done quite a few trade missions and webinars and seminars and mentoring and all the rest of it. So very much entrenched in that export space.
Thank you, Matt. I think you represent some of, you visualize for our audiences the data points that we sometimes look from above. So it's great having you with us. And Aisling?
Yeah, I'm a bit more like Fran, although I don't sit on as many committees as Fran, and I applaud how you have the time to do that straight off the bat. But my job role, as you said, Giorgio, is I represent the UK advertising industry both to government, and I run all the trade missions around the world, but for the industry. But we also compile an annual report each year, so it's delighted to see this report getting launched this morning, and I'll talk a little bit about why in a minute. But in June, just gone, at South by Southwest London, we launched our annual export report, and we use that to bang the drum on behalf of the industry to governments. That's both Department of Business and Trade and at DCMS. But what it shows us is that UK advertising exports 19.4 billion around the world, and we do that by taking brands from the UK to different markets, but also we, like Matt, lots of our members work in different parts of the world where they are bringing those brands globally and working in market. But the main kind of countries that I concentrate on at the minute is the USA, Saudi Arabia, China, Asia, and there is others that I can't remember, Europe. But I'm here and I'm employed to bang the drum on behalf of the wider industry. So I represent everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aisling. So if we can, Fran, you already mentioned something about the report and its importance, but can I ask you and then ask the others as well, if you can, if there's something in the report that that you thought was particularly interesting, a data point or a fact or a recommendation that you think would be particularly important for you, for in general, and for policy.
Yeah, I guess it's an obvious one really, and it came out in the findings that we've just seen in the presentation. But the fact that creative industries make up 13% of total UK service exports is vast. It's huge, and I'm still not sure we have adequately told that story across government so that people in whichever department are cognizant of just what a significant industry we are. So that was sort of one, and it's allied to another one, if I'm allowed two stats, and that only 2% of our exports go to future growth markets, which I think just underlines the potential that there is there, and that if we get this right and we get our approach right, not only can we embed and consolidate what we do in our primary markets, but actually that growth potential that we've got across future markets is absolutely massive. So again, it gives us, I think, a really clear steer within the Creative Trade Forum where we should be looking in future. So those would be my two.
Thank you.
I was the same as Fran. I thought that 2% growth potential, it jumped out massively. I think as well there was a few surprises for me in terms of places like South Korea, for argument's sake. That's probably not the first part of the world you would necessarily think of when it comes to selling creative services. And I think there's probably a slight element of ignorance across a lot of creative businesses around what countries they could or should go to, especially if they specialize in a specific niche within creative services. But from all of my experiences when I've traveled globally, we are so respected, thank goodness, still from a creative perspective, regardless of what's happening politically and all of those sort of things. Creativity and professional services is in the heart of British export, and I think we need to do more in terms of marketing ourselves globally and educating our creative entrepreneurs in the UK to give them the tools and the ability to be able to fly the flag and fly the nest and go overseas, really.
Thank you, Mark. You're absolutely right. I mean, the data shows over and over the strength, as Fran was saying as well, about all creative industries when it comes to exporting, especially in services. And we are seeing also transformation of the economy in terms of services, digitalization, and streaming that is opening new opportunities. So business support and also trying to work with partners to reduce frictions, I think, is key. Aisling?
I agree with the other two. The 2% was just massive for me when we were looking at it, and it is fantastic for us all to have a stat now that we can go into government when we are talking about funding for missions in South Korea. So we're doing a lot of focus on APAC region and what we can do around that as well. And we haven't had a stat like that before. So for me, this is going to make a massive difference to me at my desk. Again, we see a lot of focus go towards the US, which is our #1 export market. We're not going to stop our activity within the US, but we are looking at those future growth markets already. And that report matches the strategy that we have built out for the industry for the next 3 years. So it's good for me that there's now 2 reports out there that are both saying the same thing to support my international growth strategy for the industry. There was one other thing that just from an advertising perspective, because the report talks a lot about tariffs. And I think there is an assumption that a tariff wouldn't affect the advertising industry, but that isn't always the case. So, for example, in the recent sort of tariffs that were announced from the US, if a car company or a car brand feels that its budget is being put under pressure or there is a period of uncertainty, one of the first things that they will look at is where their spend is going. And that puts anything around marketing and advertising under pressure. And we had to do a lot of education pieces to government to help them understand that it has a domino and knock-on effect, that we see people hold back, and we're sort of kind of, working with the industry to help that narrative within the corridors of government. And like Fran says, I think as a sector, there is so much more we could do to tell the story of how our sector works and just help people understand it better.
Thank you, Ashley. I hope that with our data and evidence, we can support these kind of arguments. So, final question, if you don't mind, I'll follow always the same order. So the final question is: we clearly, as of yesterday, have a new prime minister. So if you could go and meet the prime minister tomorrow, what would you tell them? It could be something that is inspired, hopefully, by our data and evidence, but beyond our data and evidence, what would you actually go and say in order to support the growth of creative exports?
So shall I go first?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, okay, interesting one. I mean, I think there's a massive opportunity with new government being in place, and we've got some new ministers and some sort of same ones. And I think, as Aisling has just said, telling the story about what we do has got to be kind of up there. But I've got actually a really dull, maybe, thing that I would want to do, which is just about joining up across government departments, and then perhaps the reorganisation that's happening with science and innovation coming into DBT and digital being in DCMS. I think the opportunity to look at things in the round for creative industries is actually really attractive. And also with the DCMS link to soft power and the FCDO, I think there's an opportunity to create a holistic trade investment plan for the creative industries that isn't rooted in just one department, but is genuinely cross-government. And so that would be my ask, I suppose.
Excellent, thank you, Matt.
Mine's probably a little bit more around money. Everybody needs money. Everybody wants money. Everyone wants funding, whether you're creative services or whether you make coffee or whatever it may be from an exporting perspective. And I've always felt that to export properly, you have to go and visit that country. You can't be an armchair exporter. It doesn't work that way. It's like playing tennis from your sofa. You're never going to be very good at it. And I think for me personally, one of the easiest and quickest wins government could implement literally overnight is allowing small businesses under 50 employees to submit a quarterly air passenger duty tax return. We have the highest air passenger duty in the world. When you book an economy flight to Johannesburg from London, over 30% of it is taxed. And if a small business got that money back, they would stay for longer. They would employ more people. The entrepreneur or owner, God forbid, might be able to treat themselves to a business class ticket. And I think by doing that, you would stimulate the economy far greater. And it's a very small token that goes an extremely long way. So I would request that air passenger duty taxes return to small businesses.
And thank you very much, Matt. Very practical recommendation. Aisling?
Well, Matt, I'm going to tell you that idea is going to be added to my annual list of ideas that I put in.
Please add it.
Yes, don't be surprised if you get an email from me, because I'm like, yes, that is good. I could probably talk for hours if I was put in front of Andy Burnham with my list of things. I'm lucky that I have a great relationship with the Department of Business and Trade and the team that I work with. But the one thing that I would go straight in with is work better with industry. We don't expect you to know our industry inside out. We don't expect you to know everything about our industry. It's changing rapidly at the minute as well. So, but we know how our industry works. We know what markets are of importance to us. We know how Trade Mission works on behalf of our industry. And there is no one pattern fits all. To Matt's point, is the exact same with funding. Previous funding that has gone out, I think when I think about the old TAP funding, that did not work for the creative sector, and it definitely did not work for the advertising industry. So for me, it would be use people like me who are employed by the industry to, be that person in the middle, and just continue to work closely with us, but work better with us. That, I think, will unlock a lot more, will make everyone's lives a bit easier. And to Fran's point, please come together as one massive, work together across departments, because when we have to have the same conversation with different people, and then you discover a report hasn't gone to somebody's desk, and then you have to go back and do it again, it's, for us, it's just holding back what we can do on behalf of the industry. And our industry is ambitious. That's the reason why my job exists. As far as we know, I am the only person employed for an advertising industry around the world to represent them on global growth. And I'm often, put up in front of people saying, this is Aisling, she works for the UK government, and I have to remind them I don't. I work on behalf of the industry. But that shows the ambition that our industry has when it comes to global growth. And if government just came along with us, I think we'd be unlocking much higher numbers than 19.4.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Aisling, and thank you, Fran, Matt, and Aisling, for your reflections and reactions to the report and to my questions. So I'd like to bring back Daniel and Jonathan, if possible, and start the live Q&A session. So I will maybe start from a question that is from John from Everslade, a creative technology company focused on commissioning in the creative industries internationally. Creative is outside of WTO rules, and so subsidies are common. This crosses over into CreaTech, producing an uneven playing field. Can this be dealt with in trade agreements? That is a very interesting and important question. I think in the report, I believe we do discuss a bit between bilateral and multilateral agreements and agreements that may happen at the WTO level. I don't know if Jonathan, Daniel, or somebody in the panel would like to address this question.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out just there, I mean, the report's focusing on the STRI, which is looking at the multilateral restrictions, so it doesn't cover specific trade agreements per se, but the subsidies aspect does come out because it's captured within the other measures. When we broke down the STRI by movement of people, restrictions on foreign entry, it's actually captured in the category under the other measures, not captured above. And we can see that has some significant effects in the gravity model. For example, I think in terms of trying to find it here, sound recording specifically has a significant negative effect. So it does suggest in our data that there are some impacts from this in terms of the impact on the level of exports as well.
I think more generally there is, as I said, I think the reason why, and I'll take this as a chance to partly respond to Aisling. Of course, tariffs matter as well, but there are non-tariff measures that are also quite important, sometimes not discussed in the debate. This is why the report wanted to cover primarily this kind of non-tariff measures, like things that, like Fran mentioned, people mobility, for example, being able to send a business representative, as Matt said, abroad. Sometimes these things are restricted. That's why we focus on this. But there are areas like the one that John is asking that are addressed in trade agreements, but they require a lot of time for negotiations, for example. And that's what we call deep trade agreements, when trade agreements are not just about trading goods and removing barriers, but also including things like data exchange, e-commerce provisions, and digital chapters for digital services. And in modern trade agreements, we increasingly see this kind of chapters covered. And of course, the UK trade agreements also cover many of these chapters also in recent agreements. So that's definitely a good direction. But it's really quite difficult to include these chapters into negotiations. I think that's the issue. So sometimes it might be easier to do this through the WTO. I think that paradoxically the exit of the the UK from the customs union with the EU allows to have a seat in WTO and negotiate some of these things directly. So it actually offers an opportunity to discuss many of these issues that and related to what John is mentioning. So there's a potential opportunity there. And I have a question from Chris for Ashley, if you can post a copy of the report that you mentioned. And then there are a couple of questions that are related to future growth market, especially which future growth market are from the Asia Pacific region, and then also a question that how well so it's really how well from your research they seem to align to recent growth and potential trajectory of the creative industries, and do you think these selected countries are likely to deliver significant growth in the coming years relative to more established and larger country markets? Now, I think the report does kind of imply this. The future growth is mostly, I think, because these are countries that are expected to grow significantly in the creative industries. But I would like to invite reflections on this question, maybe by the panelists more than the report authors. How do you see growth happening in these markets? And you were clearly surprised by the stat that currently services are not very much exported. But where do you see growth happening in these markets?
I'm happy to take this one to start. And to Chris's question, and to anybody else who wants the expert report, is actually behind a membership wall. But if you find me on LinkedIn and send me your email, I will send you all a copy of that over the week. So I kind of mentioned that what's really good about the report is that it matches our strategy for the next 3 years, which is looking across the APAC region. And the reason and how we have defined why we need to look more at future growth markets and is based on ONS data. So our export report each year is done via ONS data, and we have a top 10 and a top 20 that we've tracked since, I want to say 2012, but I think it's actually 2014. And we then see what's moving, what's coming, what's in decline, and what is moving up in our sort of where we are exporting. And that is allowing us as the sector to see where the demand for UK advertising is, and also where there is growth coming out of those markets. And it's because we have 10 years worth of data now, that allows us to build a 3-year strategy on behalf of the industry.
Shall I add something on where we've got to in thinking in terms of the Creative Trade Forum? Because one of the questions that we had was, as we were rethinking this and thinking about its remit and its focus, what's the sort of geographical, the territorial aspect that we should look at? And we alighted on the US and the EU, definitely, and I'm really pleased to see that matches with what you've come in the report. But the third focus we looked at was India. And the reason being is that we got an FTA with that, although albeit not quite enacted yet. But that wasn't to say that we shouldn't look at future growth markets. It was to say, let's start there, let's consolidate, let's begin there. But if there are opportunities that come up, for example, South Korea or GCC or anywhere else, let's take those as they come. I think one of the changes that we wanted to instigate was to really give the Creative Trade Forum a focus. Because we are a group of people doing this on a voluntary basis, and so we've got to start somewhere. And if we have the entirety of the globe available to us, actually, how much difference can we make, and how much difference can we move the dial? So those 3 territories are the ones we're starting with. I think it'll be fascinating when we have our meeting of the Creative Trade Forum in August to see if those 3 pass the test, and actually members are up for that, or actually there's a bit more kind of interest in looking at some of the future growth markets as well. So I'll report back.
Thank you, Fran. And you made a connection earlier also with the Soft Power Council, and I think there are issues in accessing these markets that are quite technical and related to regulatory barriers and alignment, but also, of course, in terms of soft power and diplomatic relations that are really important, that the creative industries are an unbelievable leverage, in order to create those and foster those relationships that should be recognized. I have a technical question again on WTO and trade agreements, I think, which is, I think I can maybe put to Daniel. and it has to do with again WTO rules and or trade agreements and coverage in terms of use of GATT Mode 4, which is supply services through movements of people. Now, the question, Daniel, because I want to make it a bit more punctual. So I think what the report does, I think it's one of the novelties of this report, is that kind of highlights all the possible trade restrictions related to many of these issues, including people movement and supply services. So what is emerging as as most important in terms of restrictions in this sense in supply services through movement of people from the analysis?
I think from the analysis, what we saw was movement of people affects mostly the sound recording and motion pictures. So I think maybe because it's still a labor-intensive industry, and there's still touring and festivals and significant movement of people. I think it's and of course tariffs are not applied on people, right? But then there's a lot of these things that are not quantifiable, which now we see can be somewhat quantified, and these will appear as restrictions, and they do affect actual exports in the end. So I think these are, what I would say is available. But at the same time, from what we see, it's possible that more bilateral agreements can be done alongside multilateral agreements, and these might help to kind of reduce these restrictions via specific provisions.
Thank you, Don. I think we've already seen some of these provisions being included in recent trade agreements, including the one with India, for example, recognition of the importance that these restrictions have and how they can unlock trade. I have a question from Jonathan. It may be, I don't know if there's time for another question beyond this one. It's a bit of a prickly question, and it has to do with the Trump regime's volatility and how do you think it has affected credit trade? And do we expect this to continue beyond this presidency? It is a question that I would like to ask our panelists, if possible, starting maybe from Matt.
I think it creates uncertainty more than anything. So British exporters look left and they see Trump. They look right and they see Putin and Iran and Israel and all the other issues that are happening that side of the world. I think the good thing about Donald Trump is it's not forever. That's probably the biggest difference between Trump and Brexit. Brexit, we voted forever. Trump's for a limited amount of time. My business plan is longer than the next 19 months. So if there are difficulties with the US presidency, then from my perspective, we'll just hold out until that pantomime is over, and then we'll see who else comes into play. But of course, I think the other thing is as well is that when you look at Trump and some of the decisions he's made, there's been so much backtracking and so many threats, and tariffs added in the morning and then taken off in the afternoon, that it kind of gets to the stage where you take it with a pinch of salt. And I think when you look at British entrepreneurs, we'll survive an apocalypse. So having somebody like Donald Trump in play, moving the chess pieces willy-nilly, can actually sometimes be an advantage to someone with an entrepreneurial mindset. But if you're in a position where he's adding 100% tariffs on the product or sector that you're in, that's going to cause you problems. But it's a big world out there, and there are lots of little nuggets and lots of little opportunities that you're just unaware of because you just don't know what you don't know. And I often get lots of entrepreneurs in certain sectors contact me. The one that always makes me smile is entrepreneurs in the energy drink space, and they say to me, "Oh, we want to launch in Dubai." And they've clearly done no research, because the UAE is one of the places in the world where there's 100% tax on energy drinks. So that's probably not the greatest place to start with. So that educational piece and research piece is so important. But I don't think one man's crazy, decisions should outline and determine the strategy and the future of your business. It's bigger and better than that.
Thank you, Matt. First of all, because for pointing at the amazing resilience of the creative industries in general, but also highlighting this uncertainty effect. And trade and trade agreements are supposed to counteract this kind of uncertainty, right? Because trade is built on trust. So it'll be really interesting to see whether the current uncertainty, what kind of long-term effects is going to produce. I don't know. We are kind of approaching the end of the launch, and so I'd like to maybe invite some final reflections from Fran and Aisling, and then go to the closing remarks.
If I could just, for my closing remarks,
please,
just follow up on the question about Trump. From an advertising sector point of view, it hasn't changed anything for us. It's still our number one market. As I say, we're tracking the data each year. 2025 data, which is always a year behind because that's how ONS data works. We had closed the gap for the very first time. The gap between us and the US, being US is the number one exporter of advertising services around the world. We're second. But that has widened, but by such a small margin that it's not even a concern for us. The other thing that I think it's important for everyone to know is that, and I know DBT have changed their name, but to me they are still DBT until I get that clear in my head. But to see Department of Business Trade and the Great Campaign, they've already, there was the wider big creative sector mission in LA a couple of months ago, which was called Greater Together. There's a whole marketing campaign. For me, that's brilliant to see that they're being proactive in making sure that there's a good message out there, and that it is all about relationship building between, again, for us, brand agency or brand to brand. What's going up here isn't changing how we view the US or whether we want to work in there. But to Matt's point, you have to do your research before you enter that market. That's where you will fail. If you go in just going, yeah, this is the market I want to go into. We've seen several members within advertising set up offices across New York, Austin, and Seattle in the last 12 months. So it's not stopping us at all.
Thank you, Aisling. Very, very interesting account. And Fran?
I guess finally, I would say that people trade with people and businesses trade with businesses, and governments can create an environment. But as Alex just said, and I think we saw in LA that the trade is really strong and relationships are really strong, and that will outlive any particular government. As Matt says, it won't end, it won't go on forever. So I think we can be really confident that in the UK we've got a phenomenally strong set of industries and creative industries, and I think if we work together with government, then I think we're on a good path.
Excellent. Thank you very much. No, there are probably no better words to end this panel session and the launch of this report. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us today and for the thoughtful discussion. We hope the report will provide useful insights and contribute to the ongoing conversations in this area. We encourage you to read the full report. It's very rich beyond what my colleagues could present today. It is available on our webpage, and please share with colleagues. If you have any questions, please come back to us. The authors will be very happy to respond, and so are the core team in the PEC. So to stay informed about our future publications, events, and activities, I would like also to invite you to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on our social media channels. Thank you once again for your participation and support. We look forward to staying connected and engaging with you in the future. Have a wonderful day and continuation of the summer period.